That was a little bit of Billy Joel, because who else better to demo some sounds of piano than some Billy Joel music? And why not begin the video with a potential copyright infringement? That was Vienna by Billy Joel, and I'm not sure if I played that exactly right. I just did some transcribing on that, so I thought I'd play that. Today I thought it would be great to bring out the Ensoniq EPS and just talk and demo a little bit on the pianos. There were two that I got with this keyboard, one being the grand piano that you just heard, which comes off of the Essential Sound Disc #1. The other one were these black discs, and this is the Grand 88. I have not loaded this one, and I can't tell you how long, because I have not really needed to try to achieve a good piano sound out of my EPS in many, many years. So I'll just talk briefly about maybe not so briefly, but I will discuss the EPS and like how I came into it. If you've watched my other videos, you saw I have the Ensoniq ESQ1, and both the ESQ1 and the EPS spend a lot of time in hibernation in their cases, and then every once in a while I bring them out. I'm guessing 88 or 89 I got the EPS. So the difference between the two, the ESQ1 is a synthesizer. The EPS is a sampler, meaning that I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination. The sounds, I believe, that come with this are sampled in some way, and I know that you can do some manipulation as well, like you could in the ESQ1, to any of the sounds, which is pretty cool. But it has an audio in that you could sample whatever you wanted. I remember sampling my friend's bass, some guitar stuff, and I've watched videos on people demoing samplers. Inevitably in the comments section I'll see people saying, hey, is there any way that I could sample and not have the speed of it change? Back in this day, I don't know if that was possible. I think when they did sampling, they did many layers of sampling. I don't know if on a grand piano if they would sample every key, or like eventually I want to demo the pipe organ that came with this that I thought was really amazing, and they may have very well sampled each key. I don't know, but when you sample something, I guess you could think of it like using tape. In order to achieve a higher pitch, you have to speed up the tape, and it's going to manipulate, it's going to change the overall sound. Like a voice. If I put a voice in here and I play at a higher note, it's going to sound like the Chipmunks. Nowadays, we have the ability to manipulate pitch, and all that stuff is right at our fingertips now. It's so much easier. Back in the day, at least to my knowledge, I didn't have access to the ability to do that. But even at the time, I used to think like, oh man, I wish they had a way to do that. So that's one thing to note about sampling. So I wasn't really into doing like multi-layer sampling, and I did a little bit trying to really design, like I think more sound design, like sound effect type sounds that I'm sure I could dig out. Like I remember hitting stuff with a hammer and trying to get like industrial sounds in here, but I didn't seem to have much luck actually sampling an instrument, because first of all you needed a very good recording environment to do that, and I could get into all that, but I won't. So anyway, this was the piano sound that came with it, as you heard in the beginning, and as you can hear, these keyboards, and the patch does have touch sensibility, but it's just nowhere near what you'd get today. It almost to me just sounds like literally the volume is lower when I hit lighter. Like it doesn't really sound to me like the tonal quality of the note changes a whole heck of a lot. But at the time when I heard this, I was blown away by how much better this grand piano sounded from any piano sound that I had heard on any other keyboard. Unless you specifically bought an electric piano that was just solely electric piano and maybe had some decent regular piano sounds. I thought at the time this was pretty darn good. As I've said in my other video, I was in a sound club and everything, so I was at the music store a decent amount of time, and obviously they were an Ensoniq dealer, and their rep was coming in because I guess they were launching the EPS, and I'm sure somebody out there knows the answer to this, but I remember the SQ80. I may be wrong, but I think the SQ80 is like the next generation of the ESQ1. I don't know if the SQ80 was launched at the time of the EPS, and I can't remember if they were both demoed when I think they were. I was invited to go to this demo where the sales rep came in, and that basically convinced me, that like I really had to have this EPS. One of the things that they talked about were the keys, and still amazingly this keyboard is really in good shape. I don't have any problems with the keys. The EPS keys do have a very synth keyboard feel to them, so there's not much weight when you're trying to play. And whenever I would go to my piano lesson, my piano teacher would immediately be able to tell that I was not playing my piano, I was playing my keyboard, because I think my touch degraded. I was playing this thing too much. The keys on the EPS, I remember them having like a cross section of the EPS keys and how it had a special piece of foam, and you can still feel it in the aftertouch when you press any of the keys down to their first point of resistance. There's a sponginess that you can continue pushing, and that is where they picked up the aftertouch and got a lot of the realism in the samples. And I remember them talking about the durability of the keys and how if you played like a Bach fugue 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you could play this fugue for like 100 years, and these keys should be able to handle that many strikes. And I was also very impressed with the demos that they played of these sounds. The demos that came along with the grand piano, I mean, they're just like, you hear it and you're like, holy cow. It makes it sound more realistic because they included a couple Chopin etudes and some contemporary piano pieces in there. You know, it reminds me of the debate that you get into when you start talking about guitar gear and like amplifiers and which amp is the best, and then you listen to somebody that's great and it doesn't really matter what amp they're playing through, you know, because when they're playing, all you're listening to are the notes. So it's almost not fair when you have like these really fantastic musicians demoing a piece of gear. It's always going to sound better. But that's what I remember about my introduction to the EPS. So some of the limitations of it, obviously, are that it only has 8 onboard sound slots and obviously a limited amount of memory. So, for example, this Grand 88 piano is, well, they measure their memory in blocks. So it's over 1,800 blocks. The internal memory of this keyboard is only a little over 2,000 blocks. So once you load that thing in, you're really not going to be able to load many accompanying instruments, which is limiting because this thing has a really nice sequencer in it as well, which I used a ton. I did a ton of sequencing and writing and stuff. I don't know, I found the sequencer to be a lot more friendly to deal with than any other sequencer that I used. That was another huge plus. And this is obviously, I mean, you know, if you're looking for a review, this isn't really an objective review because I'm very biased towards the keyboard because I grew up with it. So I don't really have any real bad things to say about it. But the reality is that if you're in a band and this is your only keyboard, you have to kind of plan out your patches with your set. By the time I had this, I had my ESQ1 as well. You know, I would plan it out And I could do layering with the two of them through MIDI, and it was fine with me. This keyboard worked perfect for me live. Like, I didn't have any issues whenever we played somewhere, rehearsal or anything like that. This is a great keyboard. I'm going to try to load this Grand 88. I have not loaded this thing in, I mean, probably decades. Like I said, I haven't really had the need to get a piano sound out of this keyboard. What does everybody else use now currently for like a great grand piano sound, like in recording or whatever? You know, I use virtual instruments now, so I'm sure like everybody else, but I use Alicia's keys, and that is probably, I probably got that 8 years ago, so that's probably outdated. I just don't know what the newest, greatest piano software is, and this thing stopped loading. This thing stopped loading. All right. Well, this is real life, so we may have a dead disc. Yeah, well, it may really be dead now. I'm just going to reboot this. So it looks like we have a corrupt disc. Grand 88 was not loading, and it just halted on me. So what I'm going to do instead, I know this is supposed to be pianos, but we'll load up Epic Strings. More of like an orchestral movie score type of string. Again, though, when you would go to sequence this, Epic Strings is almost 1,000 blocks. So you don't have a lot of options with multi-instruments in your sequence, and then also taking up the memory of the sequences themselves. You don't have, that was one of the drawbacks. But there's always a price. You're always going to pay for something. A better quality sound, you're going to pay for it in lack of memory and resources. I mean, right away, it's very stereo sounding, and you also get the quality of like bow on strings, which was kind of new when this came out, to me at least, in my experience with keyboards. The other thing that the EPS has are these patch select buttons. So like every other keyboard, you've got your pitch wheel, and you have a mod wheel. So the mod wheel on this, okay. So the mod wheel gives somewhat of a decrescendo and what sounds to me like a roll off of top end. Which is pretty cool. So these patch select buttons, they will do something different with every patch, with every sound. So let's see. The right button, that obviously adds in the octave, which is really cool, very effective if you're doing like a, single run. The left button, okay. Cool thing, the left button has interaction with the aftertouch, with the pressure sensitivity of these keys. Because if I hit the left button and I hit that note, I get a regular decay. But when I press down and I come off, it mutes very fast, which is really an interesting thing. Both of them at the same time, sounds like it moves the patch into mono. Which is really cool, because if you're doing like an intro or something, you know. You know, whatever you're playing, then you could come in with the stereo sound, and it gives you some cool options. The only thing, I wish that the internal memory was a lot bigger. I know memory back in the 80s was not like it is today. I don't want to sound like an old man. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. So maybe at a future time I could run down some other patches. I've got tons. I mean, you know, I've got plus like 2 other cases of sounds. Like I said, if you could add like in the comments like what current pianos you use. Sorry I didn't get a chance to detail that other piano. That's kind of upsetting that I had that fail. But in any case, again, thanks for watching. Take care.